soaking wet.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for joining, Thomas. We,
Sure.
Mike and I have a passion for digital, processes where we work. We implement digital tools, and we're real involved in innovation in our personal lives and where we work at too. So we have I definitely want to get into the article where I first found that you were quoted about how technology is making the human brain dumber. But also I want to get into what neuromarketing is, because I've never heard of that term. And I know your business is focused on that, and you're teaming up with Google, Facebook, and all the tech giants with it. So
whole thing.
Can you explain? Yeah. So introduce yourself and explain what neuromarketing really is.
Yeah. You want to do it right away?
Yeah. Go for it.
Cool. So my background is I'm Thomas Ramsoy. I'm the CEO and founder of Neurons. Neurons is a what we call applied neuroscience company. So basically we still do academic research, if you like, publish in scientific journals. But what we're doing is that we're translating that into tools and insights that companies can use. So, for business and societal needs, basically. So you can imagine that if you want to understand how people respond to something, if you want to understand why people don't buy your new products or don't see your latest commercial, or what they hate it, or why people hate Nickelback, for example, or whatever it is, it's a way to measure. It's a way to measure it and try to understand it and try then to affect it. So that's kind of basically the science of neuromarketing, is trying to understand, predict, measure, and then affect consumer behavior. So what I've been doing for quite some time is to run kind of academic labs at the University Hospital and also the business school here in Copenhagen. And also then I did a spin-off from that together with Lowe's, the home improvement company in the US. And we work very closely to kind of use and kind of build a toolbox for trying to understand how people respond in different contexts, and how they respond in the store environment, to ads, to new apps, for example. And then that eventually became, way too fun. So I quit my tenure position and just focused 100% on that. So, and then in the recent years, we've kind of been turning this around. We've combined neuroscience with AI. So we can now predict how people will respond without even testing people. So that means that I can upload your homepage, social media ad, whatever it is, and it takes like 10, 15 seconds, and you get a prediction of where people will look, but also how they will respond.
So what does that really look like? How are you getting this data? Are you looking at phone use, or is like laptop use? Like, how are you getting this data and put it in a meaningful like data analytics look for people to comb through?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've done in the past is that we've built kind of capabilities for trying out, how can we test people, how they respond emotionally and cognitively, and using eye tracking and brain scanners, for example, to measure that as it unfolds over time. So we've been kind of honing in and focusing very much on that, how can we measure that in the best way possible. We've also built tools for, what we call ad insertion. So we can, on every single social media platform, we have the opportunity to build kind of a sandbox, if you like. So we can control what people are exposed to. So we can show, what if you what if you show this ad instead of that ad, for example? Do people respond differently? And over time, we've just accumulated tons and tons of data. We've tested tens and tens of thousands of people. And every year we add something like 5,000-6,000 per year to that database. And it's like, every millisecond is a new data point times 10 or something. So there's just huge database that we just, we've become experts in understanding and measure these things. And as you know, AI is all based on huge data sets, and, we got that. So we hired a lot of machine learning people to use those databases and, to train models. So the first thing we did was to train it on attention, but then now we're trying to predict how people respond emotionally as well.
Yeah, with our attention span, I notice it with myself too. Like if it's not 60 seconds or 90 seconds or short, like if it's not in that time frame, I don't want to watch it almost. So
yeah,
how are you keeping people engaged? How do you make them click this ad? Because a lot of times I know, like if I get an ad that pops up on my phone, I'm trying to find the X. I want to get it off my phone. I don't want to click on it. So how are you using this data to keep people engaged and wanting to go to these ads or watch this video?
Yeah, the first realization that you have to do is that people don't want to see your ad. That's the first thing you want to realize, right? So the question, and a typical problem if you go to YouTube and you don't have the paid account, then you get this kind of skipped up and down in the bottom right corner. You know, 95% of the time, people are just going to look at that button. They're not going to pay attention to your ad, whatever it is, right? So the first thing you need to do is to try to way to be relevant to people. To, you know, first of all, you need to realize you have 5 seconds on YouTube. On most social media, you have 3.5 seconds to actually show that you're relevant to people. There's been we did a study for the Mobile Marketers Association, MMA. It's not that MMA, but it's called the Mobile Marketing Association. This is all the big social media companies. Their rule of thumb was that they had to have ads at least 3 seconds on the platform before it counted as being seen. But what we found was that you have only 1 second to convince people that you're relevant. So whatever you do, you need to have a first-second strategy. If you don't win in the first second to grab attention and be relevant to people, you just forget about it. And what we see again and again is that people use their Super Bowl ads or their TV commercials, and they put that into a social media, and that's where you have like 15, 30 seconds, and then you have a punchline, and then you show the brand of people. Nobody's seeing that. So there's a lot of kind of awareness that the brand owners and different companies need to realize that they need to think differently today with the devices we have, with the social media we have. But people just don't want to look at you, and you have 1 second to convince people.
That's crazy. So how for social media influences, this is a big topic too, because in order to grow your platform, or podcasters, the only way to really, grow your platform is to get people engaged for a long period of time. But if you have 1 second or 3 seconds, that's virtually impossible. I mean, so what are companies using videos, or is it image, just a bunch of images flying in at the screen? Like, what
is it? Sex? What is it?
Yeah.
It's got to be sex, right?
Yeah, the old thing of old dictum of less is more is actually counting here. So the less you show, the more focus you get on the most important thing you want to say in the beginning. Show your brand, show your main message, whatever call to action or offer you have, or if you just want to show your brand, show it first. So in advertising, you need to distinguish. What do you want to do with your ad? Do you want to just show your ad and remind people that, hey, you're here, and maybe remember your ad, in certain associations to it? That's called kind of a brand building exercise. Or you have to, if you have there's a sales and people to click in on it, or some kind of offer, then that's called a call to action ad. So you have to first of all distinguish, what do you want to tell people, right? You can't do both. So based on that, you can say, if I'm Apple and I want to show, just remind people that, we're here, then that's all you have to do is just remind people, show your ad, maybe a single quote or whatever it is. You can let people alone again afterwards. If you have a call to action, that's the thing you have to focus on. Big sales these days, this weekend, come here, 3 seconds, you're done. So it's not that you have to do the ad in 3 seconds, because you can be lucky and people can stay for longer, but you have to tell people within 3 seconds at least what you got to say to them, and then 1 second is where you really land it. The first second, that determines, are you winning or losing on that.
So I imagine I feel like you would maybe feel conflicted internally at times, because you're helping companies keep people engaged on a social media device, but you also recognize from a neurological perspective that it's impacting the human health, from a sleep, from mental depression and all that. So how do you kind of balance the two? Like, you're helping these companies keep people on these devices, but that it has a detrimental impact to the human race.
Yeah, I have to say that our work doesn't really focus too much on helping people on being on the platform. We're actually just saying, if you want to communicate on this platform, this is the way to do it. And you can turn this around, is that you might think that people in marketing, they're in total control and they know exactly what they're doing. It's not the case. There's an old saying, there's a guy called Jon Mike. He said, half of my marketing budget is wasted. I just don't know which half it is. That still holds up. It's actually worse than ever, because people now, you have the cookie tracking going off, and that really makes people just more frantic, more antsy, if you like. So what happens now is that the companies generally, they're trying to find out, okay, how can I engage people? Because if I can engage people and empower them to make choices, then that's basically much better than try to lure them to stay with me, so to speak. If you keep people more happy, they're just going to be more loyal customers. I think that's the realization digitalization we see now. So it's kind of moving a little bit away from this kind of trying to trick people and convincing people or persuading people, and more engaging people instead. And that's, one of the things that I wouldn't say neuromarketing is the only contributor to that, but neuromarketing has definitely played a role, because we've shown that the more you engage people, the more relevant you are to people, the better it will be. And that kind of, for the end user, that means that hopefully we can see less screaming, less noise, if you like. It's going to take some time though.
What do you think about like the pharmaceutical commercials? Why do they go that route every time of like someone like, skipping through a meadow and, hanging out with your kids, and I guess just the good life. If you take this medicine, you have like a perfect life. What is their angle with that? It's always the same old thing. It seems like
it's emotions. It's just playing on people's emotions. There used to be here back in Denmark. There's a kind of two hearing device companies, and 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were very kind of competitive, and they're still competitive. But one of them, the marketing was run basically by the engineers, and they were actually the best company. They were actually doing the best equipment, the best hearing aids. So they try to just hammer through with true information. Here you can see the graphs were much better than any competitor, but it's so boring for people. The other company, they took the different route to say, hey, if you use our equipment, you can hear your grandchildren, you're going to talk to them, you can hear them. So that resonated with people. And that's the whole point, is that if you can make things, resonate with people and meet them at their mind state, if you like, and, their needs, it's much better for people. They're going to buy into that and going to like it more. So that's what we see, that, pharmaceutical companies, they'll learn that lesson as well. Of course, should they do that? I'm not so sure. And also this legislation in Denmark, you can't really, there's a pretty stiff regulations in terms of how much you can do advertising for medications.
I thought that was the case. Is it also for advertising to kids as well? Is that kind of limited as well?
And certain things such as alcohol, tobacco as well. So certain things you might consider if you want to do legislation and regulation about.
Isn't that funny how that is?
Yeah, but
we get exposed to it like heavily, and then it's more controlled over there.
They know what they're doing over there. That's why.
Yeah, they've been around longer.
Yeah. How much interaction do you have with the tech giants? Because I read on multiple sources that you are integrated with Facebook and Google. So how exactly are you helping them, and how much influence do you have over there?
We typically work very much with all the social media companies, a lot of the tech companies, and also a lot of the companies that are using the tech companies and trying to implement them. A good example being, going back to Lowe's, for example, when they started doing a lot of tech innovation, they said, okay, how can we help our customers do DIY projects, for example? So is there any kind of tooling can we use 3D printing? Can we use augmented reality, for example, to train people, or virtual reality to train people to tile a wall in the store before they go home and do it? And we've been kind of trying different things with them to see, how can we test how people respond to these different new technologies. Facebook Marketplace is another example as well. Before that was released in Europe, we pre-tested that as well to see, how can we use this, how can we make this a better experience for people? So our focus is very much on trying to, find the obstacles and making sure that people don't, they don't bored, or they're not really stressed out on the platform. But it's not really about, we don't work on kind of hooking people, if you like, to say how can we make people stay longer and be exposed to more stuff. So that we typically kind of refrain from those types of questions. Other types of projects are more, socially, how do you call that? Socially, I lost the word there. Reasonable projects, if you like, that are more kind of socially, ethically sound, for example. So that's, a lot of companies, they're very concerned about their CSR, so the corporate social responsibility, to see, how can we do good. And then they're basically coming to us to say, how can we, these initiatives, how do people respond to them? We don't really do much more than, test and tell them the results, basically. So, and then come with some recommendations. You should go this way because it seems that people are less stressed and more enjoying the platform experience, for example.
Wow.
But I have to admit, I'm still having issues, right? Because it's like, we know that this device here is really, it's just taking a lot of time. And so that's why we also tend to recommend, have certain recommendations for how should we not use this technology. So one of the things that I keep on recommending is that the devices, the phones we have, the computers we have, the apps we install, they should come by default with notification turned off. It's just a simple default mode you're switching. So instead of having people opt out on notification, you should just ask, opt in for whatever notification you have. Because if you have sounds and you have, the buzzing, whatever it is, and the visual notification, you're going to steal people's time away. And it's not really relevant for people.
Yeah, a lot of times. I've never thought about ethical marketing. You just think it's always ethical, but it really isn't. It's more complicated than that. And and like with you working with the tech giants, I imagine there's a couple companies that they're working with like you because it's just so big. And do y'all kind of overlap in some ways and have arguments about how things should be done? Is that kind of how that works?
We're typically not so involved in kind of the actual, the next steps. So we're typically, clients come to us, they say, we want to test A, B, and C. What seems to work the best? What are the results? How do people respond? Do we see, anyone, have a bad experience? Do we see that certain types of, ways to present in the platform works better? And then we provide recommendations based on that. Whatever they bring back, and then that's kind of a black box to us, to be honest.
You mentioned the applications on the phones. There's also a certain amount of thought that goes into like picking the color gradients on the apps themselves, right? Because if you unlock your phone and you're going to look at a text message, but the Facebook emblem looks freaking good, right? You want to click on that bad boy because it's color a certain way, or even Twitter, that blue, right? That's like picked, that color is picked to make us touch it, right? So how much thought is put into that too? And I know there's companies out there that are developing technology that users can download and basically make their phone grayscale.
Yep.
Right? Is that being widely distributed, and are people accepting that?
I think there's an awareness of it, that it exists, that is growing, and we know that if you turn off the colors on your phone, it just much less appealing to you. You're going to be distracted much less because it's kind of boring. It doesn't look that sharp, to be honest, right? So, and there's another thing that when you're designing a button or an app, for example, what you see is that there's a thing in cognitive psychology that if you can design something to become, this is kind of a flat device. It's just pixels anyway. It's 2 by 2, right? It doesn't have depth in it in itself, but if you make it look like it's grabbable or pressable or stuff like that, you're much more likely to press it. And people know this. So they're trying to design the buttons in certain ways that you're going to press it, if that's the buy button or just the app button in itself. The more you can tweak it to make people press that button, they're going to go for it, because for them that's added revenue. So that's kind of what drives it at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, I even read like the red that companies pick, like they attribute the amount of times they click it or open their app if it's like a ripe tomato, if it looks like a ripe tomato, or a ripe apple or whatever, that the users are going to pick that more often than not. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. There's certain things like sensory. If you think about how the whole sensory experience, right? You see that certain products. It could be chips, for example. When you eat the chips, the crispiness of the chips actually reminds the brain of a very crisp and fresh apple. This kind of crispiness, but it's put on speed, if you like. So it's like that crispiness is just way off the charts of what the normal brain is used to, and that's why it's so appealing. That whole sensory experience. You can even hear it, right? You want a crunchiness. The same thing is that you have certain kind of devices that when you're doing a transaction, for example, it's not incidental how you're designing the Visa, for example. They just launched a transaction sound. So when you have this kind of, you're paying with Visa, it comes with a mini jingle for a fraction of a second, but it's enough to be recognized. Same thing for Mercedes. When you close a door, it has a very particular sound. That oomph sound is designed. People are actually sitting with microphones, so just designing the sound again and again and again. Just, it's not incidental at all.
That sensory stuff's getting so big, and it's been around just so long. And it's, I think in marketing, they're so good at doing audio and visual. it's gonna be weird when we start adding other sensories like touch and smell and taste. Like if once we can implement that too, it's like gonna be even more addicting. Do you see other sensories like moving in, like haptic type things that we can add to marketing? Because like if you're getting a feel too, you're getting that third one in there. It's like, are you ever gonna be able to leave?
You have there's a famous case for B&O, the tech giant from Denmark. Here they have this kind of high end, just the kind of high end market, so to speak, for television and stuff like that. In their remote controls, they put some extra weight in that. For no reason, just put some extra weight in it, so it was a little bit more heavy, and that makes people feel that it's more oomphy, it has more feel, it's like it's more quality, it's probably more durable. We did the same thing for kind of one of those kind of home improvement companies as well. We tried that with a hammer drill, just put some extra weight on, and people were like, yeah, this is much more robust and it's like probably more durable. I'll probably pay like 20% more for it. It's like, it's just the weight, right? That was the only thing. We see the same for if you tell people that give 2 glasses of wine, say to people that this wine is coming in the market, it's going to be in low end, it's going to be like, I don't know, $8 for a bottle, and then the other glass that's going to be like 10 times that. It's going to be like $80 for a bottle. It's going to be in the high end. You go taste it. Let me know what you think, right? And people taste it, rank it. It's the same wine, but just because you gave that information, people's ranking are just going to be totally different, like 200% difference of wine. It's just, so we're so susceptible to these things. And a lot of the companies are actually using that. So part of my task is also, I have this kind of dual side to this. It's also to try to make people aware of it, because once we get aware of it, it actually diffuses the whole effect.
That's very interesting. The tricks that companies can play with, like it's the same product. I noticed that too when I'm going to Home Depot and those what's the brand, Ryobi? Yeah. Just because it's like a bright color and it looks cheaper, I don't want to buy it. Like I would rather get the Milwaukee, even though it's probably the same. Like it's probably the same quality, but it just looks cheaper. It looks like the toys my kids play with.
Yeah, and if you look at what's called the neck as well, the thing that you actually, what is it called? It's like you turn it to kind of get a grip of the whatever you're going to drill with, right?
Yeah.
It's called the neck. The thickness of that neck is also perceived as how robust the product is. If it's slim, it's like, it's a kind of women's toy, whatever it is, right? If it's a really kind of thick, robust one, it's like, I want that.
A real manly tool. Huh?
I like some tools with some girth on it.
we're so susceptible to being tricked, man.
With quantities too, like the whole McDonald's quantities, where they're pouring the small fries into the big fry container, and it's like the same shit. It's like, what is even that? It's like they're just blatantly selling us the same number of fries in a larger container for more money.
You could turn it around as well and say, if people's experience with the product, if you're affecting it so that, hey, you have a great feeling, you bought this non-Ryobi thing, whatever, Black & Decker, whatever it is, right? You bought it, you're so happy with it, right? Because it has a robustness. Is that bad? I'm not sure. I feel great when I do. When I use, it's called, I think what I have is the Bosch. I'm not sure if you have Bosch in the US, Bosch. But it's like, I have a Bosch kind of hammer drill. It's like, just going at it, right? It feels great. If they design that, I'm good, because, it doesn't really affect I'm still happy with the product, right? Wow. And sometimes we shouldn't forget that when we buy something based on the gut feeling, we're typically more happy with the purchase than if it's more like a rational choice. If you kind of, if you're going to buy a car, and you just feel so right to buy this car over here, you should buy it, because you're going to be much more happy with that car compared to whatever rational, whatever car your rational mind would decide for you. So it's it's not that bad always, right?
You're so right. We have a lot of camera equipment, and the hard clicks and the weight and the adjustability and the aesthetics. Like there's something to it. I mean, we had some tripods that we had. A buddy brought a big bulky one, and it had all these adjustments, and it felt sturdy. And we thought we had good ones, and now we're like, I'm throwing these things away. They're worthless now. But there's something to it.
Now, right?
Yeah, I don't even trust it no more. I'm just gonna burn them. And then he said it wouldn't burn, so he
Made out of aluminum.
ruined my joke. So
I'm curious. You sit with all these companies, and you're helping them from a neuromarketing perspective, and I imagine they want you to sit in some multi-generational discussions. What's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years look like? How are y'all planning with the integration of like VR technology, like headset? Because now we're gonna have like these glasses that do the same things that our phones do. So what I mean,
contacts, right?
Or crazy stuff. Or like I've even heard like there's gonna be a device that you can just put on the ground and it displays like a hologram, and you can like call people and move it like in air, like crazy shit like that. So I mean, what are y'all planning for stuff like that?
So I think that the way we expect things to happen is that new devices will come that will disrupt. If you look from 10 years from now, looking back 10 years, we'll probably say we didn't even see what was coming, to be honest. And I think that, but it doesn't happen. These new technologies that we hear about, the augmented reality, the mixed reality, the virtual reality, they won't be adapted until it feels natural. Until you can basically hold it in your hand or wear it, or it's not really disrupting to you. What we've tried HoloLens, we've tried work with Oculus when they were acquired by Facebook, for example. Also worked with Google when they designed their Tango device, the kind of the phone-based augmented reality device. And what we've seen is that compared to the HoloLens that you wear, it was really cool. People loved it. Same with the Oculus as well. But as soon as you put it on the phone, people really just started using it instead. So because it was a familiar environment, right? So there's a learning curve that you need to get over if you want to have people wear. It's just going to be niche if you have any device that people are going to wear. So we need to think about, how can we make stuff that is just accessible for people when they need it without being disturbing when they don't want to have it. But over time, of course, one of the things that we've been, working very closely with different companies on is trying to kind of predict that future. We even wrote a book about the whole enterprise called Leading Transformation, together with the business school INSEAD and then Los Innovation Labs and Singularity University to kind of look at how can you try to predict the future. And what we found was that we need to start creating a narrative. The first thing you do is you say, okay, basically what we did was to hire science fiction writers. And we said, okay, here's the plot. Here's some of the issues that we have. You go ahead, think 10, 15 years into the future, create a story. And then we based that and we took that and we basically had cartoon makers make that into a cartoon as well, or kind of a cartoon that you could read. That became like a story of let's say a person coming into a store. They were greeted by a robot in the store environment, and then what would happen? How would that help them in the store, for example? Or you have this couple that were trying to design their new kitchen, for example. Part of the big deal is if you go to, Home Depot, Lowe's, or IKEA, whatever, the first thing you do is you negotiate with your spouse, how will this look at home? Yeah, and you have these kind of mental models. So augmented reality was kind of found to be the savior of the marriage savior, basically, of that. To say, hey, we're just going to wear it, we're just going to see it as it is, and we can tweak it and as we are looking at it, because there's no negotiation about how it will look. And then when you break that barrier to actually help companies visualize the future instead of just talking about it and imagine the future, that's when the big changes are coming. So that's part of the work we've done for quite some years as well.
That's all. That's very interesting. So I'm curious, back to this digital trends story where the headline read, cell phones are making us dumber. What's like, can you expand on that and talk about how technology in itself is impacting our brains?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. If you consider what are the kind of the most cherished traits that we have as humans, right? It's empathy, being able to kind of understand people, what they're going through, that people have other, views and, responses than that you have. The other thing is creativity, that, being able to kind of see new connections and make it work and try stuff out. And then making good decisions. Rationality is the kind of third thing. That's, just not just be impulsive, but also be responsible when you're making your choices. So these three things, empathy, creativity, and rationality, are things that we cherish as, human traits, if you like. What we see is that those traits, they need time. It's really typical that you see that as soon as people are stressed, empathy goes out the window. As soon as people are just feeling any form of pressure, creativity out the window. And the same thing for rationality as well, as that if people are operating under stress, that they make stupid mistakes. We make mistakes. We go with our guts typically, and that's not a good strategy for being rational. Well, unfortunately, what we see is that as soon as you pick up a phone, you don't even need to be your phone. You don't even need to turn it on. We see that what we call cognitive demand, so how much information your brain is prepared to process, goes up by 10 to 20% just by lifting up the phone. So your mental bandwidth is already up by the time you're lifting this technology up. So that means that it's not a great device for being creative. It's not a great device for being empathetic, and it's not a great device for making rational decisions. So just by, the mental bandwidth you have at your disposal. So that's the big problem. So we should try to kind of, see how can we then use technology to not disturb people. It's basically because the people are so used to being disturbed by this device, right?
That's interesting because, we work in a corporate, setting, a very big company, and there's always that keyword collaboration, remote collaboration, virtual collaboration. And the pandemic kind of forced a lot of companies into this realm. And, everyone's working remote now, flexible work schedules and things like that. So what I'm inferring from, the article and kind of what you're saying is like, we're getting it done. We're getting by in this virtual environment. We are collaborating, but we're not reaching our full potential is what it sounds like. Like is there ever a point that will we ever get proficient enough that we can work virtually and reach 100% of creativity and that team? And, they call it the water cooler talk, will we ever be able to do that?
I think so. Yes. I think that technology can be used for good. I think that unfortunately it's kind of been hijacked by certain interests. And it's also, but there's a huge pushback these days. And we see that the first step for making change is that people get aware of what's going on. The first thing is that you get aware of, what the phone is doing to you. First step. The second step is then, okay, what can I do about it? Is like, turn off my notifications, uninstall certain apps because they don't, enrich your life, for example, right? Third thing is, do I have the resources available to make those changes, these kind of bigger changes, kind of changing my habits, for example? That's the kind of the third step. It's called debiasing very often in psychology, that you try to, unbias yourself. So the first step is then, awareness, then look at what you can do, and then do you have the mental resources to make those changes? So that's becoming more and more accessible to people now. By talking to you guys, even more people will learn about it. And I think that it's almost like there's a shift in mentality. And I think that as we've had certain other types of bigger shifts in mentality, especially in the US, I would say that with, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, I think there will be, and hope that it will be kind of a digital transformation as well, of how people perceive what the devices should do for people. Instead of being scared of it, we should say, hey, it's my device. It should work for me. It should enrich my life and make me smarter instead of enrich others by me using it, right? And I think that hopefully there can be a push in that direction.
Yeah, there's also part of that that story that hit me in the gut, because it talked about being able to recall information when you read it on your phone versus read it on a piece of paper. Can you talk about that study a little bit? Like, I think there was an actual study done on adults or kids being able to retain information from where they read it on a phone versus what they read on a paper.
Yeah, we've done several studies on that for, both for corporate, but also academic studies. And we've done it for the postal service, of course, and things like that as well. And what we find consistently is that when you present, so you have different devices, right? So you have the phone, you have the PC, you have, audio, and you can compare it to reading in a book or a paper, right? And what we see again and again is that people's memory of the content you've read is typically 30 to 40% higher when you read it on a piece of paper. That's dramatic because we rarely see these kind of big effects in most studies whatsoever. 30 to 40%, that's a huge difference, right? It means that when you're reading stuff on a phone, for example, and phone is by far the worst compared to a PC, for example. So when you read it on a phone, it's basically kind of in one ear and just out the other one. So it's like, you just remember certain things. And you see that again when you look at how people are very often quick to judge information that they're reading. Very often you see misunderstanding on whatever people are trying to say to you or what they're writing to you. As a very quick, we're very quick at trying to interpret what they're doing because we feel that we have less time. And that means that the actual conversation we have with people tend to kind of go down as well. And that's why we can have these kind of negative downward spirals in communication as well. And I think that technology can facilitate this instead of making it worse, to be honest. And there's a different way to call this. AI is artificial intelligence, but you can also call AI, you can call it augmented intelligence. So it's like you can use these devices to make you smarter. And I think that's kind of the move we would like, and the shift in mentality we would like to see.
What about audio from the device? So if people are listening to audiobooks versus, I know like if I'm reading a book, I just got done reading a book on my phone on like an actual book on my phone, and it was terrible. I almost got it to where I didn't want to read it. And then I just read a book, an actual paper book, which I haven't done in a long time. And I was able to, I'm still able to recall the information on that paper book versus what I read on my phone. But what about audio? Do we retain information from like podcasts and audiobooks like on a same level as a paperback book?
No, we don't. It's very straightforward.
What about Kindle? Like their strategy was to make it look like paper and writing.
Yeah. It's not exactly the same as reading a book, because what you get in addition with the full physical book is that you can probably recognize this, is that you can tell about which page it was, and even where on the page you read this thing. You can't really do that in Kindle. It means that you actually lose a spatial sense. You lose a little kind of sensory input on that. Yeah. So we don't read just by consuming information. We read it as a kind of a whole body enterprise, almost like. And we see that we're reading it and we're sitting in different directions, and you can feel that you're closer to the end of the book because it's weights more on the left side on the right side. It's little things like that. It just speaks volumes, right? So technology in that respect can't really replace the physical book, not fully at least. But Kindle is a good middle road, I would say.
Yeah, that I was curious about that because it's all those little things, I guess. Like that's funny you mentioned the weight on the right side or the left side of the book. I read Jordan Peterson's Jordan Peterson's book on my phone, and I can't remember a damn thing that I read out of that book.
I don't even do it anymore. Facebook guy was on Rogan.
Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, he was talking about that spatial thing too, like the fact that they're sitting there, then and in person you remember a lot more because you're hearing from different directions and things like that. But putting these headphones on and talking through the mics, those little things help you remember things. But and I think they were talking about Zooms too, like they start to kind of merge together, and you can't really distinguish which meeting was which because you're not standing next to this other person and hearing different sounds from different directions. And I don't know. I never thought that was a thing. I don't know why. Like when I was listening to audiobooks, I wouldn't retain it, or even reading the digital books. I actually thought you were going to say, because we all started off on paper, but some of the new generation have just kind of started on tablets. So I thought that maybe the data would say that they were a little better at retaining the information on a like a tablet type form.
Yeah, you would think that they're kind of digital natives or something like that, right? Mm. And what turns out again and again is that they're actually worse than all of us. So there's even been a study. There was a study from Stanford University like 10, 15 years ago when this whole kind of multitasking between different devices started, and there's a question about, youngsters like tweens and teens and young adults that were tested on formal psychological tests for concentration and in learning and memory and comprehension as well. And then they compared that to how much do they actually multitask on different devices. So how much are they using the phone? How much are they switching to the television? How much are they doing different things? And what was found, the Stanford study found, was that people, the more they multitasked, the worse they performed. So the worse they were at comprehension, the worse they were at learning, the worse their memory was for the concept. So that means that when people are actually multitasking, that's an indication that they're poor at focusing and concentrating on the matter at hand. So I think that we shouldn't take for granted that the youngsters growing up these days, they are any better than us. They're probably even worse off because they didn't have that history that we have, kind of reading and doing physical stuff, right?
I noticed that too with my daughter. I feel like I have to repeat myself a lot more, and I'm sure we all feel this way, but when my parents told me something, I feel like I remembered it. I was able to retain the information and able to recall it a lot more than my daughters are. Will that generation, what is it, Gen Z or Gen X maybe? Is it Gen? Yep. Will they be able? Can they come out of that? I mean, can they reverse these technology implications that have occurred?
Not automatically and just by themselves. It won't happen, unless you as a parent, introduce alternatives to them. You should never kind of be forced upon them. But it's like, hey, here's a physical book, and typically they're very pumped about it. They're very excited about, hey, there's a physical book. I can actually do stuff. I can read it, and it's a different experience to them. So I think that there's a way around this that you can engage and re-engage them with non-digital devices and actually train them on other things as well. Just as, you can't just expect the people growing up these days to just, do the exercise in virtual reality and then, everything's hunky-dory. And then you send them into the woods and they fall down from a branch and die or whatever, break a leg or something, right? Yeah. So it's like they need to have that physical experience. And I think that we're a couple of hundred years away from kind of crawling around in digital trees, to be honest. So we need that physical feedback, if you like.
Are you concerned for the future of what?
Yes, I am.
Like, what is I guess what's the top 3 concerns you have?
I think that the hook for me is what I tend to call supernormal design. So the good example here is that if you look back how teddy bears, how did they look like 100 years ago? It basically looked like a bear with small eyes and had this, snout and stuff like that. How does a teddy bear look today? It has kind of big eyes, it has a kind of flat nose, and it's over cute, right? Mm. And it's actually designed for you to empathize with it, to feel that, oh, it's so cute, I need to hold it. And kids are just even more susceptible to that. So what we see is that, that's one thing. We see, porn these days, that same thing, that it's over triggering people. Same thing with, candy, for example. It's, nothing in the real world is like candy. It's like sensory overload on speed, right? So I think that, and if you call this kind of supernormal design or some supernormal sensory experiences, you see that we have kind of a normal range of how we respond to things in the woods, for example, or to meat or natural food, for example. And then you have these stimuli that just overdoes that. It just breaks every barrier for how we respond. The problem that I see with things such as the metaverse, for example, is that we're just going to see more and more and more of these types of experiences. That's just going to hook people in even more than ever before, because we don't have the brain capacity to hold back once we try to expose ourselves to it. It's almost like a kind of a drug, if you like. I'm really concerned about, people might, there's a saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So it might be that people are still trying to do this because they want to engage people and they just want to, provide people with a great experience. But I think at the end of this road, we might end up at a place we don't want to be. And I'm really concerned about that.
Do you have children?
I have 3 children. I have spread apart. So one is 31, one is 22, and one is turning 13 very soon as well.
Okay.
So it's all spread apart. So we have 3 different, almost like 3 generations.
Man, so you don't look. I was thinking you were like in your 40s. How old are you?
I'm late 40s, 49.
Okay. So you started young then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's like some kind of dementia. I'm not sure. It's like, was it hard? Nah, let's try again. Oh, dang it.
So with your 13-year-old, so you have a kid that's in your 30s. So that's where we are. And, we grew up with, VCRs and limited technology, right? And then you have a 13-year-old who it's consumed in this digital world. So what kind of practices do you implement in your daily lives that have helped you and your children, and how can, we do it as parents?
I think that, so fortunately you live in Texas, right? So there's a lot of kind of nature around. There's a kind of different attitude of being in a big city, for example, right? And the same thing for me. I'm not a big city guy. So we live in nature basically. So it's like in Denmark, it's not so far away. It's you can drive from Copenhagen to, the outskirts and in the woods and, in 50 minutes or an hour. So it's like great place to be. And I think that exposing, kids today to nature in itself, just walk in the woods is like, it's not that difficult. Just take a walk, and sometimes that's enough. And I think that forcing them a little bit to be exposed to that is a thing. I would still say that having certain rules to limit, some kind of house rules, but to bring them into that negotiation, and also train them to be skeptical, because they're going to be exposed to so much more information that we have ever been before. And I think that the concern about that is that if they don't have that kind of skeptical mindset of saying, is this good for me? Is this BS? What is this, right? And just understanding that people don't always speak truth, and people don't have always, your best interest in their minds, can learn them. And it's kind of a bad, kind of sad lesson, if you like, to teach very early on. But I think that having that mindset can help them navigate the digital space. So limit the digital, have some house rules that they agree to because they are informed to some extent. The second is expose them to alternatives. We talked about kind of the books earlier as well, kind of physical things as well. And the third would be just train them to be skeptical and to learn how to navigate. I think that's a kind of 3 good rules to have.
Those are great. We were pretty savvy as kids growing up. We always joke around that we always thought our parents were stupid. But now that I'm a parent, I'm realizing that my parents were pretty freaking smart. I just thought that they were stupid. But, and sometimes I still think that way. No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. But, I feel like my daughter, so I got a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I think that they're a little bit more savvier than I was. They're they're quicker, they can pick up on things a little faster than I could. And it's interesting that you said bring them into the conversation, because I was raised in my era as like, there's rules and you just follow those rules, but bringing them in and helping decide, okay, like what are the boundaries in the house? I bet that enables them to accept the rules and maybe want to follow them a little bit more. So that's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah, and also we shouldn't shy away from actually making a stance and say, hey, this is where I stand. This is the house rules. I don't want this to happen, X, Y, Z, right? And I think that's sending a clear message. I'm from the generation where parents, the boomers, basically, they didn't have any rules whatsoever. They didn't give us any rules. So we were just kind of, it's called laissez-faire, basically. It's just, you go out and break a leg, and there's the mentor, almost like play on the highway. It's like learn something, which is kind of cool in some respects, but some guidance would also be very good, right? Mm. And their belief was that kids were just going to figure everything out themselves. We see that again and again, that, the boomers, the kids of the boomers, they had, it was really hard sometimes. But hey, we'll learn how to survive in nature, and I think that I think part of the challenge we have to here today might be that your daughters and my daughter, for example, they are very good digital, savvy people. But hey, if the Wi-Fi breaks, they're off, right? They don't know how to deal with, even themselves. It's like, what am I going to do?
Yeah,
Wi-Fi's off. My life sucks, right? Yeah. And I think that you need to train them in that. It's like, listen, we didn't even have phones. We didn't have a computer when I grew up. We barely have a television with one channel on. I think and later on 3 channels, 1 Norwegian, 2 Swedish, right? It was such a bummer, right, compared to today. But we made it, and I think that exposing them to that without becoming that, granddad talking, but there's sometimes you can put a perspective to that. for them.
I think, so the reason I asked you, like, if you're scared for the future, what I'm scared of is like the generations after us are soft in everything from a mental perspective and from a physical perspective. They're just softer. And I imagine
there's a lot of memes around that, right?
Yeah, I imagine like even like you probably look at us millennials and you're like, "I'll whoop y'all's asses, boys." Like, you know what I mean? But I don't know.
Yeah. The way I think about this, I'll bring you into the woods in Norway. I'll just drop you off and see how long you won't make it, right?
Yeah.
You remember the Rogan? He said, "I bet you with Bill Gates, I bet you I can just push my thumb into his chest and it would just pop right through his chest." It's just, he talked about 20 minutes about if he could probably penetrate his chest with his thumb.
That's funny.
Just some weird shit.
I think there's something to it, and that's what I think about. I think about how can I raise my kids to let them know like the world is not all sunshine and flowers. No one really cares about you. Like there's great people in this world, but the world's harsh, and you need to be able to withstand. Hold your own ground. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah, and also sort the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, but also realize that things can change. What you've sorted, people change and things can change, and I think that understanding that things are not static as always, and I think we, the generation, the kind of the post-war generation. I grew up with grandparents that fought the Germans, right? Mm-hmm. So they were kind of just training me. It's like, we did this. We had a pig down in the basement because we had to survive if the German came. It's like, I realized, okay, this is going on. And I grew up during the Cold War, right? So we had the Russian next door. So that I had this very kind of physical, kind of visceral realism to it, right? And today we don't really see anyone growing up with that. It's a lot of news, but it's not really substantiated in a way, right? And I think that the concern is that if it doesn't exist on social media, it doesn't exist. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the real life is out there, not on social media. And that, you see people realizing that the penny drops, and there's a huge shift in how they perceive themselves. Typically it's, a little too late, but I think that if we can introduce that thinking earlier on, don't expect any revolution, but just introduce that's fine.
Yeah. Or like panicking on social media when something happens, and it's like, if you just look around, nothing's really changed in your life. But like you're saying with your parents, growing up in that time, it's just like Florida just got hit with this massive hurricane, and those people are going to be affected. Like they're going to affect their generation. They're going to say, hey, we need to prep for this. Like we need to have protocols to get away, when this type of storm comes next time, because they got caught, and then it's crazy how that like those type of events can affect your generation, the next to come, and the next generation is like, I don't know why I do this, but let's do this. And then maybe it drops off the following one. That's interesting.
I think there will be almost like a mini experiment here in Europe this coming winter, because of the whole Russia thing. There's going to be a lot of electricity fluctuations, that we actually might have electricity dropouts during the winter, which is unheard of. We never tried this before. So what that means is that we can have that Wi-Fi dropping out a couple of hours per day. I don't know. I think that in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of freak out, a lot of kids that just freak totally out. And maybe over time, if it happens often enough, maybe they're kind of forced to think differently. Let's see. I think that's going to be an interesting experiment, natural experiment, if you like.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Ramsoy, we appreciate your time. How can people get involved in some of the research you're doing and follow your work?
The easiest by far is to go into neuronsinc.com. That's my company. Everything we are doing are posted there, and stuff beyond that as well. And I have a book coming out very soon as well. It's in Danish currently, but it's coming out in English, and it's going to be announced on our website as well. And they can follow me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Nice. Are you on Instagram and all that too?
Not so much, no. Okay. I'm mostly on LinkedIn.
Well, we'll let you get away. I appreciate your time.
You too, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank
you.
Bye.